So I want to talk about the belief system of postmodernism and why it's basically been allowed to flourish in our modern society and ecosystem. And by our, I mean Western, the Western world post World War II, post Cold War, post Soviet era USSR, fall of the Berlin Wall, etc. Postmodernism is a chain of associated ideologies that are similar enough to be lumped into one category. It essentially is a critique of the idea of objective reality and the idea that people can have objective views. The extent to which that is expressed is going to vary, I guess, depending on who you're talking to and how entrenched these people are in the postmodern belief system. The most extreme postmodernists don't believe in objective reality at all, and probably the least extreme postmodernists believe that like physical reality exists, but abstract reality is unknowable and subjective and that kind of thing. So the reason they believe this stuff effectively is due to the decline of homogenous religious beliefs and the advent of science and technology and the understanding that these religious systems are factually wrong at face value. Now, there's a problem with perception, which if you're intelligent and over the age of 16, you've probably realized. And the problem with perception is that basically it's subjective. So, people see the world through a value system, through a lens of their own poorly formulated, harebrained beliefs that they assume they came to logically, but that's dubious. Everybody cites science. The issue is science conflicts a lot, and they're not speaking as scientists. They didn't do any experiments. They haven't written any papers. They don't understand how this stuff works. They're quoting authority. So effectively what they're doing is logically fallacious because it's an appeal to authority. Now, postmodernists and postmodern philosophy takes that problem and extrapolates it a little too far, in that they say that because most people are basically unable to perceive reality objectively, and they really can only perceive it through a set of biased axioms, that reality as objectively definable does not exist, especially in the domain of complex things like culture and social structure and family structure and all these things. So this is a bad idea because clearly not all cultures are created equal, and some cultures are much better and more prosperous and have better quality of life than other cultures. And what type of culture that would be ideal can be argued about, and people do argue about it. But clearly you can rank order things in terms of hierarchical value. That doesn't mean you're going to be right all the time, but by attempting to articulate what would be the best form of existence, you can get closer to something that's ideal. And if everything was subjective, then nothing would get you closer to any ideal state or way of being. Whether that's conducting yourself, whether that's sociological, like at the level of a town or a society or a world, you can make things better with applying logic, reasoning, facts, hypotheses. You can get closer to an optimal state of existence. So that debunks the subjective reality theory. It's simply not the case. So, by the way, this is where you get people who are gay activists and they say that all families are equal. This is where you get people who say that everybody's equally intelligent, everybody's a genius. This is where you get people who say that all cultures are the same, that men and women are the same, that all races are the same. So you can see how many times you can go on the internet and see how many times that kind of argument pops up. That kind of axiomatic reasoning it's incorrect. It's simply false. It's the justification of reparations to black communities and other minorities. It's the justification for socialism in general, because if everybody's equal, then the people who are wealthy effectively stole from those who didn't. It's the justification for virtue signaling. All these things it can justify, so you can see why it's very popular among people who are very compassionate, probably prone to anxiety, and are not very intelligent. Or maybe they are intelligent, they've just rationalized it to themselves because they're not looking at reality directly, they're looking at their community, and their community believes this, so they rationalize it to themselves. So why has this been allowed to flourish? Why are there scientific papers being published on this topic. Papers coming out saying that men and women are exactly the same, all this stuff. Well, if you've seen my video called The Overeducation of Americans, you should go watch that if you haven't seen it. But it's not sped up, but you just got to have an attention span longer than a Zoomer's. The problem with our modern society is that we let everybody into college. And we're letting people into areas of intellectual thought that they're not capable of handling appropriately. So, for instance, in a psychology course, if your teacher has a leftist bent, a, Marxist bent, a liberal bent that's strong enough, they're probably going to tell you some postmodern philosophy mixed in there, a little postmodern seasoning, and they're going to preach it. They might not even know that it's postmodern philosophy, but it probably comes from like Foucault, Derrida, Lyotard, or as I call him, Riotard, or just Marx or Engels in general. Like I said, a lot of this stuff is unconscious. It's in the air. But it is still being preached. And the main problem, we are letting people into institutions of higher learning who are not mentally capable. They do not have the bandwidth to tell a good idea from a bad idea. And what that means, basically, is that we're letting a bunch of people into positions of intellectual authority, and that's the area where they're not going to... This is not their domain of competence. Because if people are not smart enough to tell fact from fiction, to tell a good idea from a bad idea, to tell a delusion from a useful fact, they are going to be prone to logical fallacies. Because that's just what people like that are like. Most people are not smart. Most people, even intelligent, normal people, like people in the 120 IQ, standard deviation, 115 to 130, generally have a very hard time objectively proving their beliefs, because a lot of what people ride on is bandwagon, is social consensus, is feedback loops, is faulty math, faulty reasoning, and people extraordinarily rarely use first principles thinking. Most people do not use first principles thinking at all, so they get to these weird abstract conclusions that have nothing to do with how the world is. And if you let enough people like that into college, like right now, half of America has or will have a bachelor's degree. That renders it useless. And it renders the average IQ of a person with a bachelor's degree roughly average. Probably a little above average, but not by a terrible amount. So I don't really need to explain the implications of that if you can think. A bunch of people are given positions of authority when they're already prone to using appeals to authority and that kind of thing. Like, for instance, you can go to a doctor now, and you ask the doctor, should you give brain-altering medication to a 6-year-old because you think he's bipolar? And they'll say something along the lines of, which medical school did you go to? Well, that doesn't answer the question. It's logically fallacious. But if you let enough people like that, who are not capable of, they're only capable of inductive reasoning, of reading research papers, they're not capable of producing information directly. If you let people like that into places where they're told that they are highly intelligent and that they're always right and that they're the cognitive elite, then what ultimately happens is you get postmodern philosophy taking hold, because these are exactly the type of people who cannot tell subjective reality from objective reality. All they can do is sort of verbally camouflage themselves against a given society and not stick out too much like a zebra. So, just wear your stripes and stay in line if that's you, I guess. But the issue is, when postmodernism is the consensus, it is very destructive to a society because it's a non-productive philosophy. If nothing is better than anything else, then nothing is worth doing. And that basically means you have depression now. So, I'm not sure what the fix to this is. I really honestly think we should not let anybody under 120 IQ into college. But the postmodernists don't believe in IQ because they think everybody's equal. They think Elon Musk is who he is and Jeff Bezos is who he is because of blind chance and whimsical fate, not because they have IQs of 160 and a monomanic work ethic. That guy outside the liquor store at some point, that could be Elon Musk tomorrow, But yeah, that's basically my take on this, why postmodern philosophy has been allowed to flourish in our world. If you have any solutions, the world needs them, because this shit ain't going nowhere fast. But talking about it is a good first step, and not being afraid to talk about it. So there we are.